When the ship decloaked, I should have checked the target before I fired.
You're damned right you should have checked. You fired at something you hadn't identified. We don't put civilians at risk or even potentially at risk to save ourselves. Sometimes that means we lose the battle, and sometimes our lives. But if you can't make that choice, then you can't wear that uniform.
So the chief did not come to the hangar deck after all?
I don't know where he was. I'm sure he was asleep in his rack, just like he said. Look, the chief had nothing to do with it. It was me. I left my post and I left the hatch open. It was me. Just me.
Good day and welcome to Battlespace 9. I'm Carl. Today's episodes are Deep Space Nine's episode Rules of Engagement and Battlestar Galactica's episode Litmus.
Hi, my name is Eric Cheung. I guess in the context of Deep Space Nine and Battlestar Galactica, I started when I started watching The Next Generation when it was around in its late fourth season, and so DS9 was perfectly timed for me because I was in sixth grade. The show ended the day before I graduated high school, and I think that I was a little bit more prepared for something a little bit more mature, and I kind of feel like a lot of times it hit a nice sweet spot when it comes to two different spectrums. One, the lightness, darkness one, and then another one, episodic versus serialization. Other than that, I've done all kinds of performing over the years, whether it's stand-up, sketch, giving tours, and theater.
Hi, I'm Amy Bennett-Zendzian. I grew up on Star Trek Next Generation. My family watched it as a family viewing event from the very first episode of the very first season. So I saw all of TNG. DS9, Star Trek just went on for so long. I think it was probably in season 3 or 4 when I went to college, which is about when I stopped watching. I might have seen an episode, a season of Voyager in there too, and then I just went to college and didn't have much time for TV, so I didn't come back and finish DS9, although I'd sort of gotten the impression that it had gotten really, really good while I'd missed it for years. And in fact, I think I started again sometime in my 20s and maybe got through the first 3 seasons again. I was showing my husband Star Trek TNG, and for that one I just tried to show him my favorite 25 episodes, which ended up probably being more like 32. And then we went on to DS9 and we started skipping a lot, especially because I'd seen those first 3 seasons a couple times, and really wanted to get further. But then once we got around season 4, we just started watching almost every episode because we were just really into it in that point. And we finally finished, I think, literally a week or 2 after the documentary came out.
I helped fund the documentary.
Yeah, and I remember talking about it. I remember talking about it with you, Eric, where you were saying, "Are you going to be able to watch it?" And I'm like, "Nope, we're still we got 5 episodes to go." By this point, I'm way, way behind on my Trek. I've not seen any of the new series or the new movies. Though I did show my husband the old movies, so.
I also curated Enterprise because I knew that Mary Beth, my girlfriend, wasn't necessarily going to want to watch everything, but she'd love the body horror stuff, the anything Vulcans, so I'd be like, okay, these are some important ones,
There is nothing like a curated experience made by somebody who knows you. For example, it would be really great if people hadn't seen Battlestar Galactica before, but they had seen Deep Space Nine, and somebody was matching episodes of the one with the other.
Well, that's what you're doing right now, isn't it?
Gosh, Carl, brilliant idea.
I will own right now, I'm never going to watch every single episode of Trek. And I have seen people, because people are so used to the 10 episode season that you can't miss any episodes. I have found that it seems like it's harder for younger people sometimes to kind of go into, say, Deep Space Nine and be like, man, I don't get it. I've watched 30 episodes of Deep Space Nine and none of this stuff is happening. What's going on? These shows were designed You don't like season 1? Go ahead to season 2. Check that out. Don't like that? All right, try 3. Like you there are different, jumping on points.
That said, I mean, like, I do think that, like, I mean, even when you go back to before DS9 came out, like, as early as the first season of The Next Generation, they were starting to plant some seeds of, like, soft serialization in there. I mean, there were the episodes with, what was his name, Remick? Who gets blowed up
conspiracy.
And he showed up a couple of episodes earlier with Admiral Quinn, I think. So they were kind of like doing little bits and pieces of trying to start serialization, and then like Sins of the Father with Worf losing his house's honor, kind of really starts the ball rolling.
Whenever Nick and I hit a Worf and his family on honor and Klingon politics episode in DS9, I would be like, oh, but my curated TNG experience didn't include like the Worf stuff. I just like made a unilateral decision to skip that, and then I was like, wait, we have to go back. We have to watch some relevant TNG so you can understand. So yeah, and that came into this episode. I was reading about it. Apparently there was a deleted scene where the prosecutor demands that Worf remove his baldric because he
Right, yeah, the baldric.
And I mean, like, well, Worf is the character that's in the most episodes and movies.
I think you would have to argue that serialization begins with Worf. That conspiracy episode in Next Gen, like, I was so scared of that when I was a kid.
Oh, me too.
And like I watch it now and it's like, this is the worst looking thing imaginable.
There was an episode of TNG where like people were phasing in and out, and a woman fell through the floor and was killed. It gave me like nightmares so much. My parents had to have a serious discussion as to whether or not we could continue watching Trek as a family event. But
it is really amazing what scares kids and what does not. Let's get to our episode today. First up, we have Deep Space Nine: Rules of Engagement. Worf is caught between the Federations and the Klingon Empire again. This time it's for destroying a convoy of Klingon civilians that decloaked in front of him. Trying to get him extradited is Ch'pak, a Klingon lawyer who they expect to be able to roll over. But surprisingly, Ch'pak is good. He paints Worf as an embittered malcontent looking for vengeance against Klingons. Luckily for Worf, it turns out the whole thing was a plant by the Klingon Empire, and Worf is exonerated, publicly. But everyone knows that Ch'pak had a point. I should say, first to the listeners, I think I am sorry, not sorry, that I have scheduled 3 Worf episodes in a row. But to be fair, next week will be a Bashir episode. And just to show there's some method to my madness, this episode, written by Ronald D. Moore, developer of Battlestar Galactica, Soldiers of the Empire, written by Ronald D. Moore, Change of Heart, written by Ronald D. Moore. All that said, what did you think of Rules of Engagement?
It was an interesting experience. I'm often mildly frustrated by Worf, especially on DS9. Mild frustration is maybe a really typical response to courtroom dramas because we have such expectations set up by fiction. And when a courtroom drama doesn't match those expectations, it can feel like, oh, they're not playing by the rules, they're not doing it right. And I felt that way sometimes during this episode, and maybe that's not actually fair.
Courtroom dramas in Trek specifically tend to really enjoy making sure that there's an economy of characters. They usually have like one of the crew as an advocate for the defendant, except for like maybe the original series' Court Martial, where they had Samuel T. Cogley on the case. But like usually it's the captain or somebody. When I was thinking about it this time, and I saw that Sisko was Worf's advocate, and particularly because Odo was sort of Sisko's research intern on this one, like it kind of felt almost like an internal affairs investigation, and like if I almost can't watch it anymore because it's partly because it is a cop show, but one of the shows that I really did enjoy for a long time was Barney Miller, because it kind of like talked about like what the police could theoretically be in a more perfect world. And in those episodes, sometimes internal affairs would investigate what's going on in the squad room at the 1-2, and Barney Miller and his squad were such above board cops that you knew that like they kind of considered internal affairs a nuisance, because like generally the way they operated was to almost like people's court, like trying to get people to resolve their issues without, taking it to the police in the first place. So here, it's interesting because you do kind of like root for the people you like, the characters you like all the time. So you're like, oh well, of course, this is a trumped up charge. It's DS9. They're not going to make it that. It's going to be messier than that, which is good.
Yeah, definitely not a trumped up charge.
This episode is sort of an intersection of Ronald D. Moore's interests. He likes a lot of the military drama stuff. So like anytime in Next Generation or DS9 where there's a military stuff, chances are he wrote the episode. And he also obviously likes Klingon stuff, particularly Worf. But character drama, and this kind of intersects all three. Sisko comes in, and like Adama, he's a father. He comes in kind of like a dad that you think is okay with what happened, and then he kind of turns on a dime and he's scary dad, which is really nice.
They both do that, right? They both turn on the dime, and well, in both cases though, I wouldn't say I was surprised. It's hard to say how much of that is hindsight, but I think in both cases, I just take as a character note for both of them that they will protect their own, and they will both make questionable decisions to protect the ones that they see as theirs to protect, to the point where it's Worf's on trial and could be stripped of his rank, but Adama or Sisko could almost just as easily be on trial and be stripped on the rank if they just had the bad luck to get caught making particular decisions that we as viewers know they have made.
And this is sort of the problem with episodes like this, which is that this in a way these could have both as easily been episodes of Barney Miller, or they could have been episodes of Taxi for that matter. This is, I feel like every show, drama, sitcom, reality show, probably every show does this at least once. If they get a character in to sort of ask all the questions.
I spent a lot of the series questioning whether or not he was really command material. And episodes I'm sort of in the wrong place as a viewer. I'm supposed to be rooting for him more than I am. But
I mean, it's perfectly valid. Yeah.
I was quite the fan of him as a young one, and it was really only in my 30s and early 40s that I started to not love his character arc, especially on DS9. So
one thing that's fascinating about this is I really think that this is a key example of Moore trying to push against the idea that the captain can never be wrong.
Ronald D. Moore, yes, he always is trying to push against that, but I think a lot of credit, particularly on DS9, but also how it influences how he works on Battlestar Galactica, should go to Ira Steven Behr.
Yes,
because I think Ronald D. Moore would be the first to admit that sometimes a lot of the credit for DS9 goes to him, when I think Ira Steven Behr was sort of overseeing a lot of that and sort of really encouraging the writers to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think that's certainly true. I think Moore got famous for it in part because he more publicly pitched a fit about it.
Well, you know what though? My very first Star Trek convention was in 1992, and he went to Boston, and I went to the convention, and he was promoting 4 episodes for season 6. I know 2 of them were Rascals and Relics. I don't know what the other 2 were. I don't remember. After that, I kind of always looked at the credits and, tried to pay attention to who was writing what. So I mean, I think, he's a little bit more amiable. I think Ira Steven Behr is a little bit crustier, but still very engaging,
I definitely want to talk about that last scene between Brooks and Dorn. But let's talk about the trial scene a little bit first.
I think my frustration was at its height when Jadzia was on trial and Chapok suggests that the fact that Worf was playing a holosuite game in which he played a historical figure who massacres civilians, that shortly before the trial, and they all look worried, and I'm like, are you serious? Like, this is so stupid. Like, that is not good evidence.
Yes.
Like, Jadzia says, it's not the same, it's a game. And I'm like, that's right. It's not the same, it's a game. What the? I don't know, maybe it's a little bit dated, like dating back to when there were a lot more sort of cultural doubts about whether or not people playing video games were then more prone to violence, or I don't know. Like, that did not hold up for me. So the other points that he made, I like when Miles said no, I wouldn't have done it. Having just seen the scene where he said fire before it had finished decloaking, I was like, Miles would not have done that. Like I appreciated him saying, like, I wasn't in command, it's not the same, which is very true and a good point. But at the same time, I was like, Miles would not have made that mistake, and it was satisfying to me when at the end, Sisko was like, it would get him to admit that was a mistake, which I appreciated, because when he said on the stand, I would have done it again, I was like, what? But then later, I guess he just didn't want to admit on the stand.
I submit that the big problem is that Sisko underestimates Ch'pak from the first moment. I was completely fascinated by Ch'pak's take on the Federation judicial system. It's an interesting system of justice you have, Captain. It does have its flaws, however. It emphasizes form over fact, which is a remarkable thing to say, because it is supposed to only represent the facts. I think we should praise Ron Canada, who is awesome in this.
I was just about to interrupt and say, can we just talk for a moment about how good Ron Canada was in this role? The classic Trek hat trick.
Worf, he very well might have done the same thing again, but you don't want to say that, and the reason is Worf is not. He's always a little too honest about. I mean, like when Quark gives his testimony, and Worf says, "Yeah, I hope I do."
Yeah, that was much more damning evidence.
Like Worf. Play your cards a little. Now I'm trying to think back to his how he played poker, and I'm trying to think how close he played the cards to his vest.
That's why the like I'd never attacked like an unarmed man bit also really felt like a gotcha in a way that was not, to me, persuasive. I'm sort of like, there's a clear difference between murdering civilians on a battlefield and an adult male Klingon punching another adult male Klingon with fists, not a weapon in sight. Like,
okay, but let's. I want to analyze the dialogue in that little exchange, because Worf says there's nothing honorable about killing those who cannot defend themselves. Are you telling me you would never attack a defenseless opponent? And then Ch'pak uses this to antagonize Worf as a witness into striking him. But then Ch'pak says, "I thought you said you'd never attack an unarmed man."
Thank you. Okay, this is what I thought happened, and I was like, that is not the same.
Nope.
You're not defenseless. You're a Klingon. You are perfectly capable of punching back.
It's theoretically an even fight. Not only that, Ch'pak was standing. He had the high ground.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, so those two moments, I was sort of like, are we supposed to believe that an impartial Vulcan, is going to be persuaded by these cheap gotchas?
Sisko should have.
But then at the same time, and as Carl said right at the beginning, the unfortunate truth is that Ch'pak was right, and Worf did screw up, and he did go eagerly into a fight when he shouldn't have, and he did make a terrible blunder that a more experienced officer, even a non-com like Miles, would never have made.
Let's think about Klingon justice for a bit. Like, Klingon justice is, you've got all these rituals, you punch each other, and then finally, like, the virtuous one wins. So in a way, like, everything, every bit of false lawyering that Ch'pak does, you are correct, and yet it doesn't matter. He is basically saying, I am going to get to the truth, not of the evidence, which I accept, but of Worf's character. And whether that will work, I think there's a big open question about whether Talara would release Worf to extradition even with this. But his purpose is not exactly to get Worf released. His purpose is to drum up sympathy for the Klingon Empire.
Yep.
That did feel a little ham-handed, where he like in the almost opening scene reveals all the Klingon Empire's motivations for staging the incident, as it revealed in the end that they did. I suppose that was just economy of writing. They had to get it in there somehow.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, but I mean, I know we were earlier talking about like the motives behind both sides of the case, Cisco and Chapok, and it is important to bring that up. Battlestar Galactica does traffic more in being, they pride themselves on like super ultra realism, whereas Trek doesn't necessarily. They like things to be nice and clean, not just in terms of the ships and the utopia and everything like that, but in terms of like presenting the episodes. And I don't know. I don't think that's necessarily either way is better or worse, but
it's different.
Yeah, it's just we know there's a little bit of artifice to it because there's a certain amount of time that they need to get this done in. So
I have to mention this as long as we're talking about the trial. I found out while reading up on it that there was a deleted scene with Kira testifying. And Kira was the one who, unlike Miles, and you're like, Miles' foil here, stood up there and was like, yeah, goddammit, he did the right thing, and I'd have done the same thing, and I'd do it again. And then after she's basically said that, Chapok brings up her terrorist background and an incident in which she was involved in a terrorist incident that killed civilians to discredit her as a character witness.
I mean, I'm pretty sure she deliberately killed children at some point. Like she was woefully missing in this episode because I had to double check to make sure she was even in it. I think she was in the flashback of Miles's testimonial.
That's right.
But,
Should we talk about that? The way they get to turn and talk to the camera in these flashbacks?
Yeah, what did you think of that style, Joyce?
I liked that a lot. At first I was taken aback, but then I was like, well, they're just not sitting in this 3-person cramped room. I actually appreciate that.
I have the DS9 companion, and I've probably read every entry, but I don't. Who knows? But they said that the device used in the episode is borrowed from a Spike Lee film called Clockers.
Yes, yeah, I read that.
And I haven't seen that specific film. I almost watched it for today. But specifically the idea of like turning to the camera does feel like a very Spike Lee move because he likes to have characters directly address the camera and kind of lean against the fourth wall, if not completely breaking it.
And not very much a Trek thing. We don't see that. That kind of thing.
I mean, this is DS9 was sort of the start of like pushing against like the conventions of Trek.
Yeah.
Like there's an episode where they had to fight to get Rick Berman to allow them to have a Klingon drinking song play outside in space in a space shot so that they really wanted to have closing credits for Trials and Tribulations that were much more in the original series style, and Berman shut that down, I think. But so they were starting to inch that way.
When you have a show like Trek, which is so married to a particular style, anytime you break it, it's huge. I think this style is okay. After the 90s, you started getting more cop shows that you do this kind of thing. Although I don't know if you have people talk to the camera, but you definitely have like sudden flashbacks.
I remember in college walking past the TV room and like Cisco was talking to the television. And I stopped and came back, and of course it was that episode in the pale moonlight. And I was so far out of the series at that point. I was like, "What's happening on? Are they at war?"
Well, I mean, I think it's a clue that it's not a documentary, which I think which is obvious, but a lot of times, when you talk to, when you talk to some fans, they bristle against anything being animated or any of the look changing, but I mean, it's not it's not raw footage from the future. It's a present day interpretation of those events and stuff like that. So everything's always going to be a little tweaked with each production era and stuff like that.
One thing that makes Ron Canada great at this is he just like he has a bit of the quality of good acting that William Shatner can do. Just to sort of set the stage, and probably if you are a litigator in a courtroom as well, it's like your job is to act out the sort of intellectual, like Kirk. The performance on TOS works in part because Shatner embraces the camp, and I think similarly, Chapok embraces the camp of camp of being like a lawyer. Like when he's like the day before, it's a little bit like he's being unfrozen caveman lawyer. I'm just a simple Klingon country doctor, but I didn't hear that. Could you say that one more time?
Well, but I think that all lawyers are theatrical
Yes.
Especially in courtroom dramas.
Yeah, well, particularly in courtroom dramas, like in fiction, lawyers, trial lawyers, I should say. Like if you're doing paperwork, maybe not, but like if you're in the courtroom on, in a trial, then there has to be some theater to it.
No one could out-camp Avery Brooks in his closing speech there. I was glad that wasn't actually the highlight of the show. The highlight was actually his confrontation with Worf on the Defiant, which was just like so much more genuine, and it made me realize that, like, oh yes, I see now how the end of the trial was not Avery Brooks being overly campy, but rather Sisko embracing the drama of it and putting on a show.
Yeah. I mean, if you are in a courtroom drama, your job is to, and probably if you are a litigator in a courtroom as well, it's like your job is to act out the leaps that you want the jury to take, right? And he's very good at his job. And one thing I love about the moment you mentioned, Amy, with Sisko, like Sisko is also very good at that job, and that moment is so right out of Matlock. Like,
yes.
And then they did it again. What do you mean they did it again? I'm not lying.
Do we think Chapok was completely in on everything? I mean, I find it interesting to think that he might not have.
Yeah, I mean, like I was undecided when I was watching it. I was thinking about that. Definitely had the same question, but I think I was undecided ultimately.
I would like to believe that him, like blithely telling Sisko all the motivations that the Klingon Empire had to set Worf up in the beginning is a little more plausible if he did not, in fact, know that it was a setup.
Yeah,
that's true. I mean, you would think that the Klingon Empire would find it dishonorable to send an advocate into the system without full knowledge of what was going on.
True.
But the Klingon Empire is pretty dishonorable.
It was a Duras cousin. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, Gowron is
thanks,
not,
Gowron.
all that a Klingon should be. So.
I think I agree with you. I like the idea that he didn't know. It's more interesting. Let us go now to that closing moment with Worf and Sisko. I should have checked the target before I fired. You're damn right you should have. How about that?
What's so cool about that scene is Sisko comes in talking about the party, and he's very, he's very, he's like jocular and like happy and all that, and what he's doing there is he's lulling Worf into a false sense of security so that Worf can allow himself to be vulnerable and confessional, and then because he thinks Sisko's gonna do, not literally do this, but like sort of do the equivalent of giving him a hug and saying it's gonna be okay, sport. But no, Sisko is not gonna let him off the hook for that, which is that's a pretty brilliant and like sort of a dad or a teacher tactic.
It elevates the episode for me as well, because without Sisko articulating that, I would have felt as a viewer that all of my objections to things that happened were not being acknowledged. Including the fact that like, okay, all right, so it turns out it was a setup and it was staged, but like, what if it hadn't been? Like, you were near, you were not supposed, you were supposed to be avoiding combat if possible. You were near civilian shipping lanes. Like, and this, you didn't check the target before you fired. It could have really happened, and you would have killed 400 civilians. Like, we can't just like hand wave that away. And so I'm very, very, very glad that they don't.
It makes the episode. I think there's no question to me.
And then again, the military culture of it, sometimes you got to make the troops happy, which again feels very Ronald D. Moore, but it also feels very Battlestar Galactica,
Yeah.
It sounds like what Adama would say.
The other thing is, I just plain should not have been on this mission at all.
That was like your first mistake.
That was your first mistake.
Yeah.
Yeah, what was your second,
Well, Sisko approved Worf for the mission. He suggested Worf for the mission. So, I mean, like, some fault does lie with Sisko there.
Yeah, we know Sisko screws up, though. Like, that's, like, well established.
But he's not apologizing for it right there.
That's true.
We know that the system is not perfect. And in fact, there are politics going on around it. The Federation wants Worf to get off because they don't want to lose influence in this section, and then the Klingons will take over. Like, that's, in a way, that's sort of what this is about, not the truth of the situation.
And for Sisko, too, there is the element of protecting his officers that he, just as there is for Adama, because he's a soft touch.
That reminded me very much of McCoy's joke in Star Trek VI. Aside from a touch of arthritis, I'd say pretty good. But I mean, like, Sisko's much more hard on his sleeve than Adama, at least at this point in the series that we've got. Like, because the 2 episodes preceding this, it was like a shock to see him express as much emotion as he did. First over Starbuck's confession, and then, in the search for Starbuck, preceding Litmus.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Like, before then, like, you always see him like in a clipboard. You don't see him even making eye contact with people usually. Yeah. He's very, very detached.
I think the big question from that scene is, the system won't hold you accountable. How do you hold yourself accountable? And I'm assuming now, we listeners of Battlespace 9 know from last week's episode that Worf, because he refused to abandon Jadzia, will never get a command after this.
Now, that's not
necessary. I mean, so this was after that?
That's another one where you gotta analyze the dialogue there, because, like, fans always say that, like, but how could Worf be a captain now? Or so, like, if Worf ends up being a captain someday, people will say, oh, well, how could Worf be a captain? You got to look at what Sisko said. He said you will probably never be a captain. He's just making an educated guess.
Oh, plus people are also just wrong about that sort of thing. Just because someone said it in dialogue in one episode, it doesn't mean that for the next 50 years in universe, like, it could actually, in fact, never happen because one character said it could never happen in one episode.
It's definitely a strike against Worf on his record.
Right, but clarify for me, because I was thinking about that episode, and I was like, so for the timeline though, this would have Rules of Engagement happens well before that.
Yes, 2 years.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I was thinking about the fact that, like, throughout the show, I have doubts about whether Worf is truly suited for command.
I mean, like, that's sort of supposed to be his arc, because, I mean, like, from the end of Way of the Warrior, he switches from security to command in the first place, and I mean, I think seeing him make all these mistakes is sort of supposed to be setting him up to, like, learn from them. I mean, your mileage may vary as to how successful he is in learning from those mistakes.
Yeah, that's the thing, though.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, presumably, when he says, I should not take on a mission like that, I assume what he means is, I should not take on a mission where Klingon civilians are around. I should only take missions where we're going into war zones to fight, and I'm not going to run into civilians. Which
I thought he was saying I shouldn't have taken a mission where I was explicitly not supposed to pick a fight when I knew in my heart I wanted a fight.
See, that's the thing. Like, you're always going to want to pick a fight, but I don't know.
The three of us are like sort of points on a spectrum of the same idea. Mm-hmm. Carl, it sounds like you're saying, like, only when civilians are involved. Amy, you're saying like when a fight is potentially
when it's supposed
at
to be
play,
avoiding a fight.
and then I think what I'm saying is like that when there's a conflict of interest, which is kind of a broad statement, I suppose.
It does seem that specifically everything Chapok said was correct about generally everyone else, Cisco, Jadzia, Miles, they're all correct in saying that yes, Worf has bloodlust and he's a Klingon, but he is capable of holding that in control to be, he's Starfleet officer first, Klingon second, essentially. And basically this specific set of circumstances put him in a situation where those got a little reversed. But whereas that's not an inevitability.
Yeah, I mean, he's somebody that does kind of have to be watched. I mean, he killed Duras in cold blood.
He's killed some other guys.
This was after Kern's memory got wiped, so he was gonna kill Kern.
Oh yeah.
Part of this too gets to the question of like what do you expect when on one culture murder it's like no way.
Yeah.
And in another culture it's like murder, well, depends. And I think what we found in the most interesting cases is that Worf has been allowed to sort of go off, sort of take off his Starfleet pin, kill somebody, and then put it back on.
Even Dax has been allowed that.
Yes, that's true. Oh, yeah, because she's from her Curzon days. And I don't know. I don't know a better idea of how to do it than that, but it doesn't quite sit well with me either. I don't know.
If the external politics were stripped away, you'd think that the defense teams would be reversed. Kind of, since there's a lower threshold for what constitutes criminal murder.
I was thinking that Klingon court ought to be in a way easier on him for.
Right. Well, and he did say that he would defend Worf.
Yeah, what else I love about that scene? Chapok's just been an asshole all episode, and he comes down to Cisco and he goes, "May I make a suggestion?" And Cisco goes like this. He's like. Wordlessly, he parts his arms and he's like, "Yeah, sure. Why not? Why don't you fucking make a fucking suggestion, Chapok? I want to hear more about what you have to say." But in the most graceful possible way, because Cisco's a diplomat.
It was a very Cisco move, something that I don't quite see any of the other captains making, where it's sort of. But I'm letting you,
Picard the Ice Cube would be sort of like, I have no interest in anything you have to say,
I have no interest in what you have to say, Chapok.
Yeah, there you go. Don't make me choose between Picard and my space dad. I can't.
Oh, so. That debate is always going on. One thing I wanted to mention, according to the book that you mentioned earlier, Eric, the Deep Space Nine Companion, I guess this was based on the incident of Iran Air Flight 655, where the United States blew up a civilian aircraft during the Iran-Iraq War. And they claimed that the plane did not answer any of their signals. Iran claimed that the plane was signaling constantly. Basically, what happened, there was lawyering for 8 years. Finally, on the International World Court, they reached a settlement, and part of the settlement was the United States regrets the sadness and the loss of life. Ronald Reagan was in this trial, and someone asked him, "Would you consider that an apology?" And Reagan says, "Yes, I would."
Okay.
So it kind of just reminds you of the disappointing nature of how these things tend to go, like lawyering, and then after a decade, maybe a thinly worded apology.
Yeah. I mean, well, it but I think I read that too, and it maybe this is a little bit of a tangent, but like the people who were thinking about that were David Weddle and Bradley Thompson, who were a writing team. Ira Stephen Bear has he always incorporates his hobbies, his interests into how he gets people into the show. He got David Weddle onto the show because David Weddle wrote a book about Sam Peckinpah, and Ira Stephen Bear is like a massive film buff, and then David Weddle was like, "Let me grab my old college buddy who used to write with me," and so the two of them pitched this episode to get on the writing team. Like he got Casey Biggs on the show because Casey Biggs was an actor in a movie about the Alamo or something, you know.
Right.
A lot of Western and horror actors in Deep Space Nine.
I mean, Jeffrey Combs.
Litmus, Battlestar Galactica. A Doral suicide bombs the Galactica, made possible because a hatch was left open on Sea Causeway. Why? Adama orders an independent investigation led by the Master-at-Arms, Sergeant Hadrian. Suspicion lands on Chief Tyrrell, whose illicit relationship with Boomer is an open secret. The deckhands all lie to protect him, making him look even more suspicious. Finally, Specialist Socinus takes the fall, confessing in a completely unconvincing way. Unsatisfied with this answer, Hadrian questions Adama, who resents the invasion of privacy and browbeats Hadrian for having lost her way. When Tyrrell goes to Adama and tries to take the fall for Socinus, Adama won't let him. You keep my planes flying. I need my planes to fly. You're too big to fail. You're going to have to feel guilty, and that's enough. Guilt-ridden, Tyrrell breaks up with Boomer. But who really did leave the hatch open? We'll never know, except it was probably Boomer, under the control of the Cylons like in water. What did you think of Litmus?
It was definitely Boomer. I mean,
Yeah, there's no way. You can kind of narrow down your list from one suspect.
I mean, it's obvious why you paired it with Rules of Engagement, but I think you could have also paired it with the Homefront two-parter.
Oh yeah, big time.
And or if this was a TNG podcast, with the Drumhead.
It bothers me in sci-fi when there is a one-to-one comparison to like the Fifth Amendment. In this world, the Fifth Amendment, just so you know, the Fifth Amendment is called the 23rd Article of Colonization.
Yeah.
And in Star Trek, the Fifth Amendment, I believe, is called the Seventh Guarantee. So if you ever get in trouble in any of these fictional worlds, that's how you protect yourself.
Seventh Guarantee seems a lot close. I mean, like, it's a lot higher on the list. It's a higher priority in the Federation.
But neither of them are 5. You know, we're really the ones on top.
it was interesting. Hadrian asks Tyrrell to voluntarily give up his right to the 23rd article, and then he evokes it anyway. And she says, well, that can be taken as evidence of your guilt. And I'm sort of like, can it? And of course, Adama says it can't, but only according to his father, the civil liberties lawyer.
In theory, judges say, strike that from the record or whatever. But in practice, human minds can't really do that. Lawyers will say, will introduce something that they know is going to get struck because they know that the jury or the judge
hears it anyway.
What are you going to do? Get a Men in Black, flashy thing?
All right, we're going to wipe all your memories, to store them in your toe.
Wipe your memory?
You know what? You broke up with him.
Invoking the equivalent of the Fifth Amendment should not be evidence against somebody, but I mean, like, in practice it is, because we're flawed humans that succumb to biases.
I just want to say, I believe there were about 6 separate times during these 2 episodes where I shouted aloud the phrase, "Don't do that, you dumb bunny." And once was when Worf gave up his right to privacy, I have nothing to hide, and once was when Tyrell gave up his right to the 23rd Article of Colonization, and the other 4 or 5 times were literally all during Socinus's testimony.
Tyrell, in a lot of ways, he's a lot like O'Brien with his little crew of engineers that he likes, and
he's the non-com and the genius,
Arguably the only non-commissioned officer we ever hear from, as far as I can tell.
Which is stunning because, because this is a show that does not believe in economy of characters. They have dozens and dozens of like just regulars practically, and Ronald D. Moore was the person that made O'Brien a non-com in the first place in Family. So you'd think that he'd be all over, like having like an upstairs, downstairs, Downton Abbey hierarchy of officers and non-coms just constantly seated throughout the show.
Maybe they're just all dead.
Well,
no, that doesn't make
let's check the dry erase board. See what.
Well, most of humanity has been wiped out. So. That's all I'm saying.
It's got to be the 99% that bites it, huh?
Of course.
Well, by having Chief Tyrrell's merry little crew, where he is going to make hooch for them, we have already seen more non-commissioned officers in Battlestar than we see in Star Trek.
Yeah, probably ever. You'd think lower decks would be non-coms instead of ensigns, but
yeah.
I think the sort of open question about this, how do you get to the truth when there are sort of situations where you're expected to lie? Boomer and Tyrrell should not be together officially, and yet the chief stuck up for you, so you want to stick up for the chief, and so you lie. And here comes Sergeant Hadrian to fuck you up.
Oh, another non-com.
Another non-com, it's true.
The Hadrian going after Adama at the end just makes no sense. Like, it does not suggest that she's so consumed with power that she's lost her head and thinks she can go after the head of the fleet. It's certainly, she does not have enough evidence to believe that him allowing two of his officers to conduct an illicit romance under his nose is actually evidence that, he's a Cylon, conspirator. So, it's just not smart or logical. And it is, of course, what leads very directly to her losing all her power and putting an end to that.
Yeah, I mean, I usually want to try to figure out, okay, let's figure it out. Let's see if there is a way to make it make sense.
That is the fun thing to do. It makes me want to give an anecdote about how I was once directing one of Carl's plays, and there was, I think, a typo on the page about how, a character was talking about, I don't know, something French like hors d'oeuvres, but it was misspelled. And I was like, well, let's just assume that this is a character note. She thinks that's how it's pronounced. And later, after rehearsal, I asked Carl, it was a typo, wasn't it? And he was like, it was a typo.
Oh, that's what's great about Happy Accident. I would, let me put forth this with regard to Hadrian. On this watch, I have been paying more attention to how long it has supposedly been since the fall of humanity. According to the Chiron in this show, it's been 24 days, 3.5 weeks. So imagine where we were 3.5 weeks ago. I was in North Dakota myself. We have seen Hadrian once before in active contrition. And she's the one who comes up and says, I hate to tell you this, but it could have been a lot worse when 13 pilots die. And I saw that, and I immediately thought of Tig Notaro from Discovery, and I was like, oh, they should have hung out, Hadrian and Tig. But this sends it a different way. Hadrian does exactly what she is ordered to do. Both these episodes use the following phrase: "The truth, wherever it might lead." Da da da. And I think, when you consider that this is the day that the leadership decides to make public, it hasn't even been a month since the Cylon sneak attack. The leadership decides to make public right now, Cylons look like us now. Adama could be a Cylon.
Making the Cylons look like humans thing public, what I did not think made much sense was, why didn't they say there are only 12 models?
Well, I guess they don't know if it's true.
That wouldn't stop most governments. Anyway. They could say it anyway. They could say there are 2 models, for all they care. They could say there's only there are Cylons that look like people, and they all look like Doral right now.
And they do that. They release pictures of Doral and Leoben.
Yep.
I do think the fleet makes a mistake, and Adama and Roslin make a mistake in keeping it secret for this long. You cannot solve this problem on your own.
That is definitely true, but I have to admit, early in the episode, because I did not remember exactly how it went, when they were going to release the information, Cylons look like us now, and Roslin is cautioning, this can have fallout, if we just tell them, Cylons look like us now, even if they release the photos, what I thought of was, the marathon bombing and the point when everyone was trying to identify bombers based on photographs, of the pictures of the backpacks, or did anyone see anyone interacting, and if I recall, there were like, I don't know if it was Reddit or what, but like falsely identified random civilians and like it's been long enough that I no longer remember if we're talking internet harassment or real life harassment of people falsely identified as marathon bombers. It can't have been very long. There were really only a few days before the bombing and them actually getting the Tsarnaevs.
Monday and then Friday.
But I remember thinking it could be like that. And then the episode didn't go there remotely at all. Like, they didn't pursue the implications of saying there are Cylons among us. Here's what 2 of them look like with some blurry photographs. Find them, and I was like, oh, okay, that's not what this is going to do. But
I think the reason Rosalind, Adama, and the other need-to-knows kept it secret was they were probably waiting for Baltar's magical Cylon detector.
Yeah.
Ah, yes. The Cylons kind of interested me in this episode. I have said on this show before, I don't like and they have a plan. I like the Cylons just killed most of humanity, and now they are contemptuous of us, but they're also kind of fascinated by us.
Yeah,
like little kids with staring at bugs and like having a magnifying glass over us.
Yeah,
and this is an early example of that. Because in a way, they're like middle schoolers, right? They're staring at Hilo, and they're like, okay, if he goes north, he's on his own. But if he goes south, then he likes her. He really likes her. And he goes south. And then I'm also, I don't know how you feel, but I am a fan of scenes where like a bad guy beats up another bad guy for...
I did enjoy that, yeah.
Or like sometimes it doesn't have to be bad guys, but they'll like beat each other up, like to look like they got beat up by somebody else.
What's your take on the Cylons in this episode?
I was thinking about like how the show was like influenced by Hill Street Blues' structure, where there's like a macro plot in each episode, like a medium-sized plot and an episode-specific plot that covers the stories. And it seems like the Baltar stuff and the Hilo Boomer stuff were very brief this episode, just quick check-ins, but the Hilo stuff was more substantial because, first of all, it was more than just like 1 or 2 scenes. Yep. It's a 6, a 5, and an 8, which I think are the only ones that we know about at this point.
I believe so. Yeah, that's right. There totally would be different ones if we did know about more of them.
And and I think this is the first time we see them kind of conspiring on New Caprica, maybe like on this particular mission of theirs, the Gods of Olympus.
I remember when the show first aired being very impatient with the Caprica storyline. Maybe there are more reasons for my impatience that I have forgotten now, but I think some of it was just a desire for everything to be neater. For, humanity's been wiped out except for the fleet. Well, then why are there still people alive on Caprica? Like, this is confusing to me. And in fact, it's not that easy to, wipe out all of humanity. And of course there would be survivors all over the place, remnants, and the fleet would not be the only ones. They might just be the largest, and it's totally makes sense. But I think I was more looking for the fictional neatness.
I guess Hilo just must have really good anti-radiation meds. Because
I did reread plot summaries of the episodes that I didn't have time to rewatch, and that was explicitly covered in one of them.
Yeah, I guess it works. It just seems like it seems like it shouldn't work.
Did he not share those anti-radiation meds with all the people that were in the miniseries, like Left Behind?
I definitely saw someone saying, what happened to all the other people? This, and I was thinking that too. I'm like, there should be people or there should be bodies. There should be something.
Did he eat them?
This city should not be blown up and empty. It just shouldn't.
Like it's very neutron bomb.
Yeah.
That whole plot line for the first season was not originally planned. He was only there because, apparently he was a popular character in the miniseries. So maybe that's why it kind of comes off a little, half-baked.
Right. That would probably explain it. I really liked that miniseries.
I think that's right about Hilo. I guess test audiences were like, man, I can't wait to see what happens to that guy. And I guess more was like, me too. I like the weekly adventure aspect of it. But I think I could see your frustration, Amy, because, there are just so many open questions rattling through this show.
That's why I gave up on Lost.
Very Lost.
I only got a few episodes into Lost. I was absolutely in love with the first episode. But basically, as I watched 3 or 4 more episodes, and I started to realize I think they could have hooked me if they'd answered some of my questions and then opened up new ones. But instead, they never answered any of them. And I was like, oh, I don't have time for this.
Yeah, I tend not to watch that many new shows for that reason. I except for Star Trek, and that tends to be the one that I'll give each season a chance and watch all the way to the end of the season, because I know, generally speaking, they're probably gonna stick the landing at the end of the season, or at least they have an ending for the season in mind, because that tends to be at least the way the serialized shows are doing it now, where they know sort of broad strokes the beginning and the end, and it's just a little bit ambiguous how they're going to get from point A to B, but it's not necessarily like we're going to spin our wheels for 9 seasons or something like that, and then kind of figure something out when we know we're not coming back.
Hadrian is, of course, named after a Roman emperor.
Yeah,
and
one that has a wall, right?
One that has a wall. And I did a lot of research on that emperor by Wikipediaing his name and skimming through the article. Emperor Hadrian was known for being very logical, very team-minded, but also very capricious if you got on his bad side. So, a little on the nose there, Ronald D. Moore. I'm just saying. Socinus is the guy who confesses.
Yeah, I was just about to ask. Now I need to know about that name.
He was a theologian. And he was part of, I think the 17th or 18th century, a non-Trinitarian branch of Christianity associated sort of with skepticism, and they believed in free will. Socinus's performance kind of fascinates me in this because, he's talking to Callie and the other like handsome-looking guy whose name I forgot. And he, the handsome-looking guy is like, hey, it's every man for himself now. Rah, rah, rah. And he and Callie are like, no, we've got to stick out for each other. And his next scene directly after that is being grilled by Hadrian and saying, no, I did it. I went for a smoke, or I went for the galley or something. I did the thing that you want me to prove that I did. I left the hatch open. Sure. Yeah, that's what I did. I left the hatch open. And he is sort of feeding himself to the tribunal in the most misguided way possible, because he doesn't lie enough to get the chief off, and he doesn't lie enough to save his own skin.
Well,
he's just sort of lying.
This dumb bunny.
I found that kind of interesting.
It sounds like he was named ironically then, because I think he's always saying, just tell me what you want me to say. Yes. I want to please my Papa Bear.
He had the longest eyelashes ever. I was just it made him look very youthful.
He looked like he signed up for the military a week ago.
Oh.
Yeah, he's pretty lucky, huh? He was on a ship.
This is sort of basically a story of prosecutorial misconduct, because this is supposedly a tribunal, and yet the tribunal is just Hadrian and 2 or 3 character actors eyeing skeptically,
writing stuff with their pens.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, they were the Klingons that reacted to McCoy's joke. The
Yeah.
soft touch.
The big flaw in the independent tribunal law is that the tribunal is not accountable to anyone.
Uh-huh.
She goes into this sort of assuming that everyone is lying, and the hell of it is they are.
Yeah, she's right. She's totally right.
I mean, we should remember, and I kind of wish they had brought this up in the script, but Tyrell is not guilty of leaving the hatchway open. Tyrell is guilty of hiding Boomer when she engineered the water explosion, unbeknownst to her. And when he should have reported, as Ames, friend of the show Ames, says in our 3rd episode about water, he wasn't guilty this week, but he was guilty 4 weeks ago.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what I meant too. Like, she's just about right about everything.
Yeah,
The
she's
only-
right in the broad sense.
Yeah, she's the only thing she's wrong about is Adama being a Cylon conspirator, which is just nonsense.
She's not as young as Tyrell's crew, but I get the impression that she's also like pretty green as a lawyer, which kind of like makes her somebody that wants to prove herself in a case, something like this.
And I think, remembering those 24 days, like, everyone here has something to prove. Everyone on the fleet is scared. Like, I believe completely that Tyrell would hide Boomer, and I believe that Hadrian would abuse her authority with equal measure for similar things.
That's a great point. You know what I just realized? So this is after Laura's been challenged for the legitimacy of her presidency, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, which Hadrian would know perfectly well. So Adama is hardly untouchable. Like, neither of the two leaders of the fleet they're just primarily leaders because they happen to be in the right place at the right time, and the people around them, while initially grateful for leadership, there are going to be some people who will be acutely aware of the arbitrariness.
Yeah.
So why couldn't a sergeant depose the the person currently running the fleet for having made decisions that personally angered her? If they had showed us her being more angry about the stuff she's uncovered, rightly, that she's correct about, and really angry about Adama's leadership, then it maybe I'd have bought it more. If less of an implication that she'd just gone wild with power, and more that she'd had a really specific aim here.
That's if it's a conscious motive. I think if it is sort of like if it is sort of her like just sort of trying to prove herself, then she might not be aware that she even has an ulterior motive. She might not be experienced enough to detach enough.
And I think it's an open question about whether anyone on Battlestar can do that. Can anyone do what Worf did and realize, what, I screwed up, even if I can't.
Well, I mean, like there's the parallel scene. I mean, that's probably one of the biggest reasons you paired these episodes together is the Adama Tyrell scene and the Sisko Worf scene.
Yep.
At the end of each episode, and Tyrell, he doesn't come to it as easily as Worf does, but he gets there.
How do you think Adama handles this conversation in contrast to Sisko?
He's working on a tall ship model. So like again, he has this tendency to appear detached.
Gentle and detached.
He's definitely not. It's a device for him. And Sisko's device is to wear his heart on his sleeve and to lull Worf into the false sense of security by saying, "Hey, there's a party going on in the promenade." It's they both have their methods, and they're both effective at drawing out the confessions.
Well, Tyrell comes there explicitly to confess.
Do you think Adama would have brought this up on his own if he had not?
No,
I don't think so either. I think
either that, or he would have just waited for an opportunity, which is not quite the same thing as bringing up on his own. But I could definitely believe that he had it in his mind that he was sort of like, if the opportunity arises.
He was waiting for Tyrell to get there. So that's that's like he yes, Tyrell came to Adama, but I think Adama was like, well, if Tyrell wants to stay on my good side, he's gonna come over here while I'm working on this ship, and not a second later, maybe.
That's true. Adama does give off the feeling that he knows what you're gonna do. He's kind of dad who knows you, and you feel guilty enough. You're gonna say something.
And Sisko, by contrast, I think deliberately had every intention of making this conversation with Worf happen as soon as possible. And as soon as he came on to invite Worf to the party, and he the conversation began. He was like, "Oh, this is it. We're doing it now."
Sisko also knows that Worf is going to say what he's going to say, though, too. I mean, like, they both know,
they both
as
know
fathers. You know, Sisko's a little bit more cut to the chase.
If there is a difference, it may be that Worf is kind of Sisko's Sisko is kind of Worf's mentor, and as a commander. And with Adama and Tyrell, it's more like, I need my planes to fly.
Yeah.
I don't really know anything about what you do.
There are definitely a few layers down on the... Tyrell is further down in the hierarchy. I mean, like, Worf's a senior officer.
Yeah.
He's basically... He's the first officer of the Defiant, which was why he was in charge in the first place. Well, you know what? You know what the thing about DS9 is, which is interesting? I kind of like it, is that everybody cross-trains. Like, everybody fills in on each other's station, pretty much.
That's true.
Like, partly because they need to if they're gonna split time between the station and the Defiant.
A little known fact, but they also all have law degrees.
Yeah.
Well, that's clearly you have to take law school to go.
I mean, yeah, that's probably.
That's just,
I would not be surprised if. I mean, like, if you're gonna be out discovering strange new worlds and a lot of times being put in the place of prosecuting justice this particular way, I mean, like, hopefully you would.
At the very least, you have to watch a lot of episodes of Matlock. Matlock is a decent Klingon name, actually. Matlock.
Yeah, you just need like an apostrophe in there.
I thought that Ron Canada was like the runner-up for the role of Martok.
Oh, wow. Wow, what a difference that would make. These shows have been Rules of Engagement for Deep Space Nine and Litmus for Battlestar Galactica. Who wins? What episode did you enjoy more this week?
Oh gosh. You warned us you were going to ask us this question, and so I think I have the answer now. I think I'm going to have to say DS9, which it's a weird thing to say. It's not my favorite episode of DS9. There are others that I would love so much more. But I also can't deny that even with a flawed episode, there was just so much pleasure for me in returning to DS9 after I'd been done with it for, I guess, a couple years probably. And it just made me really happy to see it again and to think about it again. With BSG, I admire the show, and I did really enjoy the first season back when I watched it, but it doesn't hold that same place in my heart. So it might have been a better made episode of television, maybe. But DS9 will still win.
Deep Space Nine. Eric, what do you think?
I think I'd also have to go with DS9. I mean, not just because it's probably my favorite TV show of all time, but I think this the Litmus. I'm not sure it quite stands alone as an episode as much. I do want to find out a little bit more, and it does feel a little incomplete. That said, of course, Battlestar Galactica is more realistic in the way it presents itself, because, for one thing, a lot of the times they shoot on locations for ship compartments and stuff like that, which is interesting. Like, until the 2009 Star Trek movie, that's not really something that you saw done.
I have to say, I'm really a big fan of Tyrell and Boomer's makeout cave.
I don't think I see it, but like
that probably that looked like it was probably a set though.
Yeah, they're on the edge of what looks like a fountain or something, but they have like a dock.
They really found a romantic place for their hookups.
Yeah, that's probably the only romantic place in the bowels of the ship, but they found it.
There definitely are episodes of BSG that would beat DS9, like head to head. You know, like 33 is such an amazing hour of television. Like, I just love that one.
One could argue that I'm setting up an unfair contest. There have been 175 or so episodes of Deep Space Nine, and about 80 for Battlestar. I am also going to say Deep Space Nine because I just think that for a trial show, this is written extremely well for the reasons we said. Battlestar is great. I don't think they quite nail Hadrian, and they definitely don't nail the Chief. Or I find Boomer strangely silent on some of the aspects of what's going on. Like, she should know. She should have a point of view.
I wonder if that's like a sort of a problem with trial episodes generally, because I remember that was a problem that came up with they talked about that when they made the episode Dax.
Yes.
You know, it's a trial episode. She's not in it. Even Rules of Engagement, Worf's not super involved in it. If you have a courtroom drama, it's not generally gonna place a lot of demand on the person playing the defendant. It's gonna, you know, it's much more about the lawyers.
I actually agree with the choice to center it on Sisko in this case, because it's kind of Sisko versus Shataq. It's kind of Klingon law versus Federation law. I do sort of wonder if we lose something with Worf, but even so, Deep Space Nine wins. And for the record, this is episode 7. We're halfway through the season. So far, we've had 4 wins from Battlestar, 3 wins from Deep Space Nine. It's all tied up. It's anyone's game. I'm excited. Eric, Amy, thank you so much for being on this show. This was a lot of fun. Is there anything you want to plug?
Well, in November, I will be playing Macbeth in a production of Macbeth with Theater at First. Theater at First is, you can find out more information about that at theater with an R-E at atfirst.org. That's the big thing coming up now. But if you want to stay up to date on anything I'm up to, you can also go to facebook.com/Eric Cheung, Cheung, artist, or youtube.com/DLZ2000.
Amy.
I don't have much to plug in general, but if anyone's interested in my theatrical writing, I am on New Play Exchange at Amy Bennett-Zendzian. I can't be bothered to spell it. It'll be in the credits of the episode.
Tune in next week for a Bashir episode of Deep Space Nine. We are pairing Inquisition with 6 Degrees of Separation, and the theme is mind fuckery.
Nice. Bashir is my space boyfriend, so.
I've been Carl, and remember, the day before. The day before. Good night.